Today we're going to talk about the age of data. And so, what does that mean? In the beginning, God created the internet, and it was good. Or was it? With the internet came the post-truth era, right? And more on what that means later, but let's play a little game. How many of you think that you can tell the difference between a lie and truth on the internet? How many of you are good judges of that? Well, a lot of hands here. Okay, well, a couple of you. Let's play a little game. Throughout the course of this presentation, you're going to see some quotes, some famous quotes from famous or infamous people, and one of them will be a lie. One of them will be misinformation. One of them will be a falsehood. And see if you can pick out which one it is. And we'll take a look at the end we'll give you the answer at the end of the presentation. So, there's this blogger by the name of Joe Scott. He has this great science blog on YouTube, and one of his videos that he had was very, very pertinent to what we're talking about here. He basically spoke about the post-truth era, and in it, he described the case where there was a principal of a school that was arrested for drug trafficking charges and firearm offenses. And it was a big hoopla in the school, and everybody was talking about it, and it was really, really a big scandal. But there was only one problem. It was totally not true, right? The principal was actually was arrested because everybody was talking about the fact that he was arrested. And this really just showed how dangerous the social media world has become. And the irony of all this was that the false truth, the sort of the leak, which basically said he got arrested, actually came from their own media class. And it was a class assignment to see how fast false news could travel. And some student thought it would be pretty funny if they actually made a joke about their own principal getting arrested. So if you haven't seen that video, check it out. It's really worth a look. So the internet was created about 50 years ago, right? But the World Wide Web was maybe about 30 years ago. And it took us in Bitcoin 10 years before Satoshi Nakamoto is giving us the metanet. So what is the metanet? Well, quite simply, it's just Bitcoin plus the internet, right? And that's a metanet. But I think that's going to require a little bit more explanation. So we'll talk about each of these in turn. Let's talk about the internet first, right? What are the good things about the internet, right? For those of you old enough to remember the world without World Wide Web, but, we get a lot of good things. For instance, there's a free exchange of information. For the first time, you can create your own online communities, forums, you can get your own interest groups together, and that was great. There's also allowed self-publication, so it started with blogs, and now vlogs, and YouTube, and Twitter, and Instagram. So basically, you can just get your information out there without any sort of gatekeeper. It allows freedom of association. It made it a lot easier to meet people. A lot of older folks among here, like myself, remember the days when it was really hard to meet somebody. Imagine how you would meet a group of friends if you didn't have a cell phone, right, or email or Twitter. It gave a good measure of censorship resistance, which was really good. And finally, though, it brought about e-commerce, right? That's the big deal. That was the whole World Wide Web thing. With e-commerce, you have Amazon, you can buy stuff. And there was a guy, I remember in 2003, he took it as a bet that he could live 1 year in his house, never leaving his house, but just ordering stuff through Amazon. And that was a big deal, I guess, in promoting Amazon. So this is another famous quote. And everybody in crypto should know about what this is talking about, right? Because we all know that FUD can travel a lot faster and is much more efficient than the forces of truth, which you require to disprove misinformation, right? All right, let's talk about the bad things about the internet, right? Hate speech, right? With anonymity comes total disregard for social decorum and basic human decency, because when you don't have any sort of retribution, nobody knows who you are, you can sort of say whatever you want, and you can do all sorts of bad stuff that you wouldn't do in real life. The whole profession of trolling and shilling just was invented, right? Because this is actually a viable marketing strategy, right? You can actually, it's basically the task of getting your opponents angry so that they flip out on the internet and makes them look bad. And it's actually used as a sort of offensive marketing campaigns, right? fear, uncertainty, and doubt, as we already spoke about, like the telephone effect is 1,000 times worse on the internet than it ever was over the telephone. Dark markets, so we have, Silk Road, of course, drug trade, but, there's a lot of stuff that are kind of like white-collar crimes, like IP violations, but, there's a lot of bad stuff, too, like human trafficking and all those kind of stuff on the dark net that you don't see, but it does exist because of the internet. And most importantly, it brought about this whole attention-based economy, right? Because the problem is the model of the internet was not monetizable unless advertisement came in to fill its place, and because that was just a copy of the model that the television networks and stations had. But the problem with this is now there's just no way to sort out the good from the bad information, right? The problem is the problem we have here is it's a question of good information is not free. So how do we solve the fact that good information should be worth something, right? We have this thing called Bitcoin, right? But Bitcoin is not digital gold. I'm sorry. So because digital version of gold isn't valuable intrinsically, right? What is valuable is an immutable global ledger of truth, right? A source of truth which everybody on planet Earth is going to share and use. And the more people using it, the more value it becomes. So that's kind of the intrinsic value of this network. So if you can take this commodity, this sort of valuable commodity, which is this ledger of truth, and you marry it with a network of data, then you can do wonderful things. That's what the metanet is, right? It's literally just a marriage of data with the internet of data, and you put some intrinsic value on top of that. It becomes, you've probably heard this in many talks already today, it becomes, it's DDoS resistant because attackers have to pay your victim in order to attack them. So it becomes less attractive to attack. It makes for better security because if you put all your logs on the metanet or on the blockchain, then your logs can never be deleted. So, imagine logs that just can't be deleted and you don't need to back up. And that means, if you did your logins this way, then it would be very, very difficult for hackers to go in and erase their trails. It's private, but also transparent. And finally, it turns this whole monetization model of the internet on its head. It becomes, the data owners become the sort of the rulers of the system. If you own valuable data, you can sell access to it and you make money directly, right? So how does this universal source of truth then benefit society? Let's talk about how it actually makes our lives better, right? First things off, it makes copyright infringement a lot easier to police, and I think given recent events, I think we can appreciate how it would be really nice if you can automatically just solve, you can see who registered what and when, and there's no disputes there. It simplifies tax accounting. Imagine if all your books and all your cash flows of a business was done because all your ledger was on the internet, on the metanet. And then imagine you can just pass your auditors public keys, and then they would be able to find all your transactions and do your accounting for you at the end of the year. It makes corporate finance a lot more transparent, so that's also good. And also, you can structure, your company and governance, and everything can be done in in the same fashion that's transparent. And it makes for the true global marketplace, because now you can sell your data from anywhere in the world to somebody else in the world, right? Without an intermediary. If it is a pure, sort of data content asset. And of course, this doesn't mean you can sell illegal data, because of course the metanet is trackable, so you will be accountable for what you sell. And this just means that we're going to have less issues of like Enron, right, or Bernie Madoff, because the reason why companies can get away with this is because they can keep two sets of books. But if everybody used the one ledger, then it'd be very, very difficult to try to do funny business with your numbers. So how many of you have heard of the Byzantine generals problem? Okay, good, yeah, because this is a Bitcoin conference after all. So one of the things which is interesting here, though, so I won't go into the problem because you guys are all familiar with it, but most people know it as a solution to the double spending problem, right? So a brief summary, the Byzantine generals problem is how do we get more than half of these generals to coordinate a day of attack? when they can lie or when they can just accidentally have their messages lost, and then they would never be able to coordinate to attack Byzantium, which is a larger sort of kingdom in the middle. So Bitcoin solved that because we have technology these days, and it's equivalent of having like a magic well, which the generals back in the 15th century would have to say you have to draw 10,000 buckets of water before you can send one message through some magic ink that you find at the bottom of a well or something like that. And if you forced every general to have to get the ink in order to write a message, then they can't really cheat, they can't really lie, because it costs them time and work. So Bitcoin solves this, and it solved the double spending problem. But what people may not realize is if we've solved the Byzantine generals problem, that really means we've solved the problem of coordination of a group of minorities can always get together reliably in order to overthrow an oppressive majority ruler or government or kingdom or hash cartel. If that's what we've really solved, then could we have just happened upon a self-adjusting, a self-regulating, virtuous, free market, capitalistic governance system, right? You don't need someone to police this, because as long as everybody can guarantee they can get together and overthrow someone who's abusing their power, then maybe we trust our politicians more, right? Or maybe they will have to become more honest, otherwise we wouldn't trust them. So what are the benefits for the government? Right? So this is what people don't usually talk about. It would really reward honest politicians, right? If you did your budget, if you did your public spending budget on the blockchain, because it's public money, you would have a hard reason to argue why you shouldn't be putting your public spending budget on the blockchain. It's for everybody to introspect, to scrutinize. That would make politicians more honest. And if those politicians didn't make it into office, I'm sure their competitors would the next election cycle. So it would also make collecting taxes a lot easier. Imagine being able, if you paid your taxes at point of sale, and if your income taxes were deducted at the point of salary payment from your company or your employer, well then you wouldn't even need to do taxes at the end of the year, which would be like wonderful. I mean, not really wonderful because not a lot of people forget to report taxes, so maybe a lot of those people would have less income. But I would argue that because of that, the government would obviously collect a lot more taxes. There'd be a higher tax participation rate, but that would actually counterintuitively, I believe, result in lower taxes. Because the government or your congressman or minister of parliament here, they would have a hard time arguing why, since they have a 300% surplus in tax revenues, why they shouldn't lower the tax, maybe split the difference, 25% for the people and 25% for the government, so we split our savings or something like that. It'd be very hard to argue why you wouldn't be able to lower taxes then, because the government's collecting so much more. So it all goes back to a question of scaling, right? And because none of this really works unless we have scale. And because once we have scale, which means people are using it for real things, for tracking, logging. Once we have use, we have utility. And once we have utility, we have value. And then we basically have this sort of utopia of value and data. So it goes back to the last quote here. Someone once said, all issues in Bitcoin and associated systems, including those of privacy and node incentives, are solved at scale, right? And so we already have the foundations built. The MetaNet foundations have already been laid. All it takes now is for people to go out there and use it. Thank you. Oh, I almost forgot. Did anyone know, who thinks, which quote was a lie? Which quote was a falsehood? Anyone say this one? No? Nobody said this? Nobody thought this was a lie? Well, actually, if you did, and you're just too shy to put your hand up, if you said that this one was the falsehood, then you'd be right, because Satoshi Nakamoto did not say this. It was actually said by the one and only. Yes, it was. Thank you. Oh, just one more thing. This quote, which is often attributed to Mark Twain, wasn't actually made by Mark Twain. It was actually made by a pastor by the name of C.H. Spurgeon. It's just a testament to how the internet is not going to tell you the truth most of the time. But if this one was the lie, and if this one was the falsehood, what was the last one? What does that make the last one? I'm going to leave that to you to decide. Thank you.